The next amendment I have listed is the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman, clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Mr. Banks of Indiana. Identifier Banks _117.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, is recognized for 5 minutes on behalf of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bipartisan fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, signed into law by President Trump, prohibited Department of Defense dollars from funding universities who host Confucius Institutes. My amendment today would simply ensure the same protections for Department of Education dollars by prohibiting funding in the budget reconciliation package from going to universities who host Confucius Institutes. The Chinese government currently sponsors Confucius Institutes on 38 college campuses across our country. For a decade, our intelligence agencies have warned that the Chinese Communist Party uses this initiative to spread propaganda, recruit influence agents, engage in cyber espionage, and commit intellectual property theft, which is collected and sent back to Beijing. This is accomplished under the guise of cultural development, but the secrecy restrictions and funding under which this program operates leaves no doubt as to the program's true intent. Even China's former head of propaganda, Li Changchun, said Confucius Institutes are, quote, an important part of China's overseas propaganda setup, unquote, end quote. In January, President Biden withdrew President Trump's proposed regulation that would have required student and exchange visitor program certified schools to disclose their agreements with Confucius Institutes or risk losing their SEVP certification. With the elimination of that proposal, there are now even fewer safeguards in place to protect U.S. intellectual property and prevent abject CCP propaganda in our universities. It is beyond time to eliminate funding to schools that readily seek to brainwash students through this program. I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Does anyone seek recognition on the amendment? I recognize myself on the amendment and move to strike the last word to speak in opposition. While many of my colleagues have expressed concern over the transparency of the Confucius Institutes, I would like to remind our colleagues that we included a provision in the fiscal year 21 National Defense Authorization Act that requires the Department of Defense to prohibit funding to institutions with the Confucius Institute unless the secretary determines that such contracts robustly protect academic freedom. Denying funding to institutions and students just to so-called attack China adds to the rhetoric that continues to fuel violence against Asians and the Asian American community. We don't need this provision. It's already been handled in the Defense Authorization Bill, and I would urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time. Does anyone else seek time on the amendment? If not, gentleman from
Mr.
Michigan.
Chairman, I withdraw my
Gentleman from Michigan withdraws his point of order. And the question now is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks. All in favor of the amendment will say aye.
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 All opposed, say no.
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 Noes appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman from Indiana asked for a recorded vote, which will be rolled as previously stated. The next amendment I have is also to be offered by the gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman from Indiana has an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.